of fields, and had they used the file parser, they would have lost about 3 or 4 calendars would have been truncated, and they would lose data. Given they were using those calendars for track possessions of railway, that could have been quite nasty. So just a little warning there. So what are the actual problems that requires a bit of software to solve it? So I call them sharing dilemmas. So there are 2 sharing dilemmas. The first one is when you're receiving files from other parties. Let's say someone's sent you an XER file, or you need to send an XER file to somebody. And the 2 dilemmas, let me cover the receiving dilemma. So there's this little diagram just trying to say, well, what's actually inside the XER file? Well, you've got a lot of project data. And that project data is split into 2 types. There's data in that XER file that you need, and there's data that you don't need, that you couldn't really care about. The needed data and the data that you don't need is split into 2, what I call core and extras. So core data, for example, would be the activities or the relationships. But the extras might be some of the user-defined fields, or could even be issues. The data you don't need, of course, is split into core. So I didn't need it, but it needs to come across anyway. So how do you handle that data if you coming into your systems? Well, the first thing is you need a mechanism to remove the extras that you don't need. So that's quite safe to do. So let's get rid of the codes, the fields, issues, anything that we're interested in that's not part of the core and you don't need. So XER Manager has the capability to remove those. The remaining of what's needed, you need to be able to change their names and map them to the names that you use in your system. So for example, if you need the resource assignments, then you actually need the resources, but if you may want to map those resources to the ones you've got, or you may have notebook topics you may have one called project notes, and incoming notebook topic is project notebooks. You don't want to end up with multiple notebook topics confusing your existing users. You want to rename them so they map to the existing ones. So the yellow bits would be renamed. So even ones that you don't need but they are core, in other words, they have to come across, you can put mapping rules in. The ones that you don't need, you really want to isolate them. And an example would be is I need the resources to come across, but I don't want them to accidentally match the resources I've got because somebody used the same name. Or there's a calendar coming across, or I don't want it to accidentally match the calendar I've got. So one way to isolate those is to prefix them, and then you're guaranteeing that it won't match. So even if a resource appears in a different structure inside the XER file and it happens to have the same ID as one it found, even if you don't have access to that resource, so your security is locked down, you can't even see part of that resource pool, it will tidy it up, match it up. Next thing you know, you've got resources, assignments to resources that you don't have access to. So you need a facility to prefix. In the dilemma of sending data, you have 2 types of data, and I apologise for the acronyms here. The project data, when you're sending an XER file to somebody, you have data that you're willing to share, so that's the WTS, and you also have data that you're really not willing to share, and that data may be, oh look, you've got margins, or you've got cost fields, you've got issues in your project with respect to the contractor that you're sending the XER file to. Or you're a contractor and you've got your profit margins in there and you don't really want that information to go upwards. So it's split into data that you're willing to share and data you're not willing to share. So again, that's split into core and extras. So there's the core data that you actually have to give them, and then there's some extras that you don't have to give them. So you need a way to address those. Well, again, you could just remove the extras of the data that you're not willing to share. That's easy enough. But how do you handle data that you must give them but you're not willing to share? In other words, it's sensitive data but you don't really want them to give it. So an example of that may be that you need to give them the activities and the resource assignments, therefore you need to give them parts of your resource pool, but you really don't want to give them your resource names. Now, prefixing them is not going to do anything. So there's the ability to mask those names. We call them obfuscation. Nice word. Comes out of the IT area that stops making source code of programs readable. So you can't remove it because it's core, but what you can do is mask it so people can't understand it. And a simple way of masking it is to replace, for example, the names of resources by simply their internal IDs, and so people don't know exactly who you're talking about. On top of all that, the data that you're not willing to share, so you've got to pass over the resource details, and you've obfuscated their names, but there may be email addresses in there and their title and things that you really don't want to share. So what you can do is you can spot clean those fields. So you basically say, look, I'm going to clear out the titles. I'm going to clear out the telephone numbers. I don't want people having access to that private information as it's sent out. So, and I'm sure that the individuals don't want their telephone numbers and employee codes, etc., being emailed around the world. So there's a facility, what we call spot clean, where you can pick any field and clear it, or in actual fact, you can change its value. One of the spot cleaning you can do is, for example, you could change the case of an activity. You know, somebody supplies an activity name and it's all in uppercase, you could move it to lowercase or proper case. Or selectively, you may want all the milestones shifted up to uppercase because that's your standard. So there is spot cleaning. So the three use cases that XER Manager is being used for is when you receive files. So just recounting there that if you simply import them, Primavera P6, if they're not in the database, it will configure them for you as if some administrator had actually inserted them. So you'll get user-defined fields and project codes and activity codes. All that unwanted data will come in. If you get rid of them, of course, then it will reduce the size of your input file. And one of the most common things right now is people are getting into is I'd like to get rid of the OBS, just reduce it to one OBS instead of having the whole structure, and map it to one of mine, or get rid of the performing organizational breakdown structure, which is the POBS, which appears to be polluting a few of the XER files these days. If simply imported, the required fields may have different names. So, for example, your units of measure, activity codes, and notebook topics, you can map those names and to get rid of the clashes, as we talked about before, you can prefix them before importing. And when you're sending files out, we talked about the sensitive data, so you could actually clear the budgets and the issues and the logs, things that you don't want. You have to, that you can delete, and if you can't delete them, then you can spot clean them. We talked about those phantom projects in there. So you exported one project, but you didn't realize that your XER file actually had 15 projects in it. Go to import, P6 says there's only one project in there, but in actual fact you may find the work breakdown structured and the budget logs of 15 other projects. So XER Manager will actually address phantom data as well, so you can obfuscate it, etc. The third use case is merging databases and consolidation mapping. And a few months ago, a Platinum Oracle partner was actually recommending XER Manager to its client to assist in that, which was, I suppose, was a smile on our faces that we developed a facility to repeat the migration. Because you can have a template, you simply click the button. Because you can run it across a whole folder of XER files in one click, they can actually set up all the mapping for the migration of one database to another, and they have a repeatable process. So when the day comes, they've been able to test it, and then when the day comes, they can just press the button and it happens just the way they tested it. So there's just a few things there what it can do. Simple things like downgrading the version number, but it can do a number of other things. For example, it can change your global data down to project level data, remove unwanted project calendars, etc. There's a number of things that are very easy to do.